The Johnson family had moved into the quiet Brookside neighborhood with high hopes. Michael Johnson, a hard-working father of two, had always dreamed of a place where his children could ride their bikes safely and where neighbors smiled when they passed by. His wife, Emily, loved the idea of a close-knit community where families gathered for cookouts and children played outside without worry. At first, Brookside seemed perfect. The streets were clean, the houses well-kept, and the community boasted a pool, playgrounds, and lush green parks. But what the Johnsons didn't realize was that peace in Brookside came with strings attached. Strict rules set by the HOA. At the center of those rules was Margaret, the HOA president, a woman known for her sharp eyes, her ever-present clipboard, and her unyielding devotion to enforcing every regulation. The trouble began one evening after Michael parked his pickup truck on the street in front of his own house. To him, it was harmless. He had been working late, unloading equipment for his job, and didn't have the energy to fit it into the garage. But by morning, a bright orange violation notice was taped to his windshield. Street parking prohibited. Move immediately or face fines. It read. Michael frowned. He had seen other cars on the street before, but perhaps they were exceptions. He moved the truck into his narrow driveway and thought little more of it. But the notices kept coming. Each time he parked even briefly, another citation appeared. It was as if someone was watching his every move. Soon, he realized who it was: Margaret, walking the neighborhood with her clipboard like a sheriff on patrol. Emily tried to calm him. Maybe we should just follow the rules. It's not worth a fight. But Michael was growing frustrated. The garage barely fit their family car, much less his truck, and the street was the only realistic option. What's more, he noticed Margaret wasn't consistent. Some neighbors parked overnight and were never fined, while others seemed targeted. It's not about the rules, Michael muttered. It's about control. His frustration boiled over after a particularly long day when he came home to find not just a notice, but a fine. $50 for parking in front of his own home. He slammed the paper onto the kitchen counter. Enough is enough. This isn't a neighborhood. It's a prison. As weeks passed, the situation escalated. Fines increased from $50 to $100, then threatened to rise daily if the violations continued. Other neighbors quietly confessed to similar experiences. We've all been scared of Margaret, one mother admitted. I got fined for my son's basketball hoop. Another family was written up for having chalk drawings on their driveway. The Johnsons realized they weren't alone. Fear and resentment were simmering beneath Brookside's polished surface. What looked like a perfect community from the outside was, in truth, tightly controlled by an HOA that seemed more interested in punishment than community. One evening, after receiving yet another fine, Michael decided to fight back. He wrote a letter to the HOA board, arguing that the parking restrictions were unreasonable and selectively enforced. To his surprise, Margaret showed up at his door the next day. With her clipboard in hand and a tight smile, she said coldly, "Mr. Johnson, rules are rules. If you don't like them, perhaps this isn't the community for you." Michael glared back. "This is my home, Margaret. I'm not leaving because you've decided to play dictator." Their exchange was loud enough that neighbors peeked out of windows. For the first time, the conflict wasn't hidden in notices and fines. It was out in the open. Word spread quickly. Neighbors began talking, comparing stories, and realizing how many had suffered in silence. Encouraged, Michael organized a small meeting in his backyard. About a dozen families came. Some were nervous, afraid of retaliation, but slowly they opened up. Stories poured out. Citations for garden decorations, warnings for holiday lights, fines for kids leaving bikes on the lawn. Emily listened, horrified. "It's like she's trying to control every part of our lives," one neighbor said. Michael stood and addressed them all. "This isn't just about parking. It's about fairness. We deserve to live here without fear. If we don't stand together, nothing will change." His words struck a chord. That night, they agreed to challenge the HOA's authority. Their first step was a petition demanding fair enforcement and the revision of certain rules. Over the next week, Michael and Emily went door to door, collecting signatures. To their surprise, most people eagerly signed. Even those who had once stayed quiet admitted they were tired of the constant surveillance. Margaret, of course, fought back. She sent letters warning residents that supporting the Johnsons could destabilize the community, and even hinted at property values dropping if disorder was allowed. But instead of scaring people, her threats united them further. Neighbors began seeing Michael not as a troublemaker, but as a voice for reason. The tension came to a head at the next HOA meeting. The room was packed, more residents than ever before. Margaret sat at the front, gavel in hand, flanked by board members. Michael rose to speak, holding the thick stack of signed petitions. We, the residents, demand fairness. Parking on the street does not harm anyone. Selective enforcement and outrageous fines harm us all. This is not what community is supposed to be. Applause filled the room, drowning out Margaret's attempts to quiet them. Other neighbors spoke too, sharing personal experiences. One elderly man said he had been fined for leaving his granddaughter's car overnight. A young mother tearfully described being threatened with eviction over holiday lights. Each story weakened Margaret's authority. When it was Margaret's turn, she snapped. Without rules, this neighborhood would fall apart. You think you want freedom, but what you'll get is chaos. But her words no longer carried weight. People shouted back, "We are the community, not you." For the first time, Margaret's power visibly crumbled. The board, sensing the shift, reluctantly agreed to review the parking policies and consider reforms. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Still, Margaret wasn't finished. Over the next month, she tried to retaliate with new fines and warnings, but now residents openly defied her. Many refused to pay. Michael, with legal help, discovered that the state's property laws limited the HOA's authority to regulate public streets. Armed with this knowledge, the residents pushed harder. When a local news station covered the story, "Neighborhood battles HOA over parking fines," the pressure became unbearable. The image of hardworking families punished for parking their cars struck a chord with viewers. Support poured in, and suddenly, Margaret's once feared HOA looked petty and cruel. Under growing scrutiny, the board finally relented. The excessive parking rules were repealed, unfair fines were canceled, and residents gained a stronger voice in decision-making. Margaret, faced with mounting criticism, eventually resigned as president. A new board was elected, one that promised transparency and fairness. For the first time, Brookside felt like a true community. On a warm summer evening, months after the battle began, the Johnsons hosted a block party. Neighbors brought food, children played freely, and cars lined the street without fear of fines. Michael looked around, smiling at the sight of people laughing and connecting. Emily squeezed his hand. "You did it," she whispered. But Michael shook his head. "We all did it. Together." The fight had been exhausting, but it had also brought the community closer than ever. And as he watched his children ride their bikes under the fading sunlight, Michael knew one thing for certain. No clipboard, no fine, and no HOA president would ever take away the simple joy of feeling at home again.